This is Dennis Ramundi. I'm here with my co-host, Phil Goldberg, author of American Veda and expert on all things spiritual. Our guest today, Mark Nepo. He is originally from Brooklyn, New York. He is a poet, a philosopher, a survivor of cancer. He's been writing in the fields of poetry and spirituality for 30 years. He broke onto the scene with his best-selling, New York Times best-selling book, the Book of Awakening, and his current book, and I think his 19th book, is Things That Join the Sea and the Sky. Mark, thank you so very much for taking the time to come on with us today.
It's wonderful to be with you. Thanks for having me.
Mark, for those listeners who are not familiar with you and your work, perhaps you can give us a sort of thumbnail overview or a look back on how you came to the work you do and the sort of origins of your own spiritual path.
Sure. I think to start with, well, I'm 66 right now, always getting older as we all are, and
yes, we are.
boy, and when I met someone our age when I was younger, I thought they were very old. It doesn't seem so old to me now. But when I was a young boy, I mean, before I had language for any of this, I think that the world, especially the invisible world, the wholeness of the universe, God, whatever name you want to give to that totality, always has spoken to me through metaphor. Even as a boy, I'd be alone in the woods and the wind through the trees would speak to me in patterns. They'd say, look what happens when we let things through. What is that like? How can you use that? Go, think about that. And so I was always in conversation with the universe. And then, in high school, I started to actually write because the first woman I fell in love with broke my heart, which is archetypal. And,
Right.
I didn't have any, I wasn't a loner, but I didn't have any close, deep friendships yet in high school. It wasn't until I got to college that I started to have my first real soul friends. So I began in high school writing as a way to make sense of this broken heart. And, again, I started to realize that as I did start to heal, I wasn't just in conversation with myself. Actually, through the broken, open heart, I had deepened in another way, another trail of conversation with the universe. And so, it wasn't until I was in college, which was in upstate New York in Cortland State, in the State University of New York system, that I realized that I was a poet. And that really came to me in a vision. And I really hadn't written much, really. But, I went home excited to declare to my parents who were, grew up in the Great Depression and were very focused on survival and the literal nature of things to help their children get through. And I came home and declared, hey, I can't wait to tell you I'm a poet. And had one of those, had one of those classic arguments with my father, especially, how are you going to make a living? And what have you written? And of course, I hadn't written anything, but I knew I was a poet. And out of my excited mouth, I don't know where it came from, but I said to my father, I'm going to live a making. And there was a moment of silence, and then he just dismissed that as gibberish. And I went away thinking, where did that come from, and what does that mean? And began to slowly discover what that meant, to live a making. Now, of course, everyone, whether you're an artist or not, everyone has to find their own personal relationship with surviving and thriving. And so making a living is surviving, but living and making is thriving. How do we balance those? So I, was committed and began working greatly and, went through, got my doctorate at SUNY Albany in poetry and English, um, and then I started teaching actually at the University of Albany when, in my early 30s, I was, fell into a journey with this rare form of lymphoma and was turned inside out and upside down and almost died. Had two, it was a 3 year, the heat of that journey was 3 years in which I had a large tumor growing in my skull bone, pressing on my brain. And that, after all kinds of trials and tribulations, vanished actually, and was kind of an obvious miracle. And within a year of being thrown back into life, there was a sister tumor on a rib in my back, and it began to grow. And now all the things that in the obvious miracle didn't work. And I had to develop traditional medicine, and I had that rib and its adjacent muscles removed surgically, and I had to go through, because it was a rare form of lymphoma, and I didn't have any, I should have had terrible symptoms, but I didn't. And so I was a candidate for very aggressive chemotherapy, which almost killed me, and finally had to say no to that, and was kind of spit back out into the life from the mouth of the whale of cancer, kind of like a modern Jonah. And all of a sudden, there was no normal to return to. Everything that had my life was gone. It was like when I was diagnosed, I went through a door, and I think anyone listening who has been through a life-threatening situation will understand this. I went through a door to find out what was wrong, and when I was diagnosed, the door I went through had vanished. Life is, up to that moment, was gone and over, and it was a new world. And, being blessed to still be here on the other side of all that, this was now about 36. And a couple of things. I'll get a little echo. You hear it? No?
Phil,
Yes.
Mark said he's getting an echo.
Are you hearing it, or?
I'm hearing it, yeah. I'm hearing you. We're okay.
Oh, you hear me. Okay, all right, let's continue and see if maybe that was just a momentary thing. So, on the other side of all this, some of the key fundamental ways that I had been transformed, one involved that while I was always from an early age, kind of, again, without language for it, I was basically a mystical being. And let me pause and say that for me, the very kind of basic definition of a mystic is, if you believe in anything larger than yourself, you're a mystic. And it's only when we start to try to name that largeness, that invisible wholeness, that we go to our theological corners, But really, if you believe in anything larger than yourself, you're a mystic. And even an atheist believes in something larger than themselves. They just call it nothing instead of everything. So fine, we can still have a conversation.
But Mark, if I could interject, I want to ask you one question.
Yeah.
So you got a PhD. That's a lot of work to get a PhD in English literature from friends of mine who have done that. And so that was, and then when did your attention turn towards spirituality? Was it the diagnosis of cancer and dealing with that shifted your interest? I mean, what was your dissertation on? What were you interested in literature up to that point, and then where did it go once, or did you give up on literature altogether once you were diagnosed with cancer?
Well, so, and this dovetails, thank you for that question, with the ways that I was transformed. So, I always, without realizing what to call spirituality, I was always interested in that, in the larger sense, in the relationship of a living being with the whole, WHOLE. And I was in a very creative doctoral program where I was able to do, my first book of poetry was actually my dissertation. But I went about all of that through my head. I was very intellectual and conceptual, even though
Hmm.
my interest, the subject I was interested in, was mystical and heart centered and holistic. I went about it in a very rational way. And I think, it didn't. And I was also say that at that early age, I was driven to peace, which didn't really work.
Hmm.
and and so, almost dying and surviving, all of that changed because I, I dropped from my head into my heart through no wisdom of my own, but just from what this experience of almost dying and still being here did. It stripped me of all the baggage that I had been taught was required, both intellectually, fundamentally, conceptually, relationally, and it it made it so that there was very little between me and life.
Hmm.
Like the veil had been thinned, if not removed. And so now, like snow in March melting into the ground, my whole sense, my whole consciousness melted into the ground of my heart. And so ever since then, my mind has served my heart and not the other way around. And so everything got more real and direct. And the boundaries between genres, for instance, just started to vanish. My writing and my books I respect, any one genre. You can devote your whole life to being a novelist or a scholar, and that's worthy. And I don't, demean that in any way. But for me, all of the genres after that started to become tools in one toolbox. So if in all of my work, it's hard to put it, my spiritual nonfiction books are categorized that way, but, basically it's a very personal voice. It's a narrative voice. When I need to use story, I use story. When I need to use history, I become a scholar.
Uh-huh.
When I to explore the larger notions, I become a philosopher. I just use whatever is needed and weave it all into one. So, I think that I was interestingly always interested in literature and stories that were spiritual, that were real, that were grounded. And it was only, I think would I have evolved the same way without my cancer journey? Maybe. It probably would have taken a lot longer. And I don't know if I would have gotten hit that fundamental rock foundation. I might have still been struggling between my mind and my heart. So I think it definitely, just made me naked and raw in the presence of being. I would say that the other major difference, which again I had inclinations toward, but it really blew open after my cancer journey, was, I'm Jewish and I feel a great tie to the heritage, but I'm a student of all paths.
Hmm.
And that definitely came because during that journey, um, I was blessed to have people from all faiths offer me kindness and blessings and help. And so when I was, on the other side of it, still blessed to be here, I wasn't, and I'm still not wise enough to know what worked and what didn't. And, and so ever since then, all my work, my inquiry, my books, my teaching, I am committed to revealing what I feel is the common center of all paths and the unique gifts of each. And even more so, the teacher in me is committed to introducing people to their own wisdom and how to personalize these things in their own lives.
Mark, I have two strange questions about your stuff as you were, because I too am, and
Dennis, I'm having a little trouble hearing you. You're
Yeah,
fading.
no, that's Phil. Phil,
that's Phil.
you're having a problem, Phil. You have to get off the speakerphone, or I mean, you have to get on the
Oh,
speaker and your headset. Something's not working there.
something's not good with the headset.
Now that's good. Yeah,
Yeah,
That's
that's
good.
better.
yeah.
Yeah, now.
Oh, okay.
Yep. So yeah, you said you had two.
Sorry about that. So
Okay.
yes, as a fellow Brooklyn boy growing up, I have two questions. One is, you mentioned walking in the woods. Um, That was not a feature of my life in Brooklyn as a child. And the other is, did your parents ever accommodate or get used to your earning a living as a poet?
Well, so for the first question, I always joke because I learn a lot from nature, but I'm not really comfortable in it, because I really am an urban creature. I mean, you can just drop me in any city and I feel, like a farm boy would be in the woods. I am just comfortable in any city. I visit nature. So I feel like, I have a visa in nature. I am not a permanent resident. And, but I have learned so much from the little pieces. But I like Whitman, which I love so much about Whitman. Whitman was the first real poet, especially American poet, to treat the cities and the urban landscape with equal reverence and wonder, as Thoreau would say, would do nature. And I've always felt that and felt more at home. But I've been blessed to have friends who are comfortable in nature, kind of, escort me or take me along. I recently, here's a good example, and it's in the One Life We're Given. I have friends in Charleston where I just came back. I teach there every year. And I have friends who are native there their whole lives. And so, on the tail end of a retreat, we always have a day where we can spend time together. And they took me out to what was once a plantation, which is now a wildlife preserve in south of Charleston. Well, there were alligators and all kinds of things there. And they're just, we're walking on a path. And I'd never seen an alligator in person, and these things are primordial and truly cold-blooded. And I'm looking, at this 12 to 14 foot alligator that's maybe 50 feet from us in the water on the edge of the shore, and we're walking on a gravel path, and I'm thinking, he doesn't know that he's supposed to stay off the path.
Uh-huh.
And I was very uncomfortable and was in their care, and we obviously got through it okay. But the metaphor there was, that we often find ourselves, especially in modern times, as observers of a world that we think we're safe from. I think you can see this especially with embedded reporters in scenes of war. Oh, because they're watching and they're recording. Oh, we're exempt from this. Oh, we can watch the alligator and it'll be fine. Well, that's dangerous. We have to have respect that we are a part of everything we see. So that.
And your parents?
And my parents. So they never really. I think that both of them are gone now, and my father was 93, died about 4 years ago. My mother a year and a half ago at 89, and they never really, as I said, they came from the Depression, very literal, very intelligent, and books were everywhere in our home, but they always were very nonfiction, historical, very literal-minded, and very creative, both of them. My father was a master woodworker. My mother was an amazing knitter and weaver and did quilts and all kinds of things. So I think the creative force definitely came through them. But we spoke different languages, and so they never quite understood it. They never really read very much of my work. And at the end of toward the end of their lives, when it was in 2010 that Oprah discovered my work, and so as that got more attention, they were proud of me. Well, honestly, I don't think they knew what for, but
Right. Uh-huh.
my father had seen one of the interviews I'd done with Oprah on TV, and when we talked, and he was in his late 80s then, and I could tell he really was trying, to be nice. He was proud of me, but he really didn't get any of it, and which was fine. There were things, and I don't mean that as a demeaning thing, because there were ways that he embraced the world through his woodworking and his creativity and his love of sailing that I didn't quite understand completely. But, he just, the only thing he could offer was that, boy, you have a good voice, you'd be good on radio. And I said,
Very good.
thanks, Dad,
Yeah. Hey, Mark, I wanted to ask you. I'm very curious. Everyone I know that's ever written a book has hoped that Oprah Winfrey would feature it or discover it somehow. How did that happen for you? What was that experience like, and did it come subsequent to your cancer diagnosis? I assume it did. Because,
Yeah, yes, this came, God, I think I was 58 or 59 when Oprah discovered my work, and I was in my 30s when I went through cancer, and you know, uh, the Book of Awakening was published in 2000 and had a wonderful word of mouth following for 10 years before Oprah discovered it, and when she did, it immediately, literally within like 24 to 48 hours, it was all over the world.
wow.
It was number one on Amazon, and it was on its way to being number one at the New York Times bestseller list. And within a week or 10 days, there were all kinds of offers from foreign publishers to translate it. So it's just and how that happened. I know people often ask, and again, this was through no effort or wisdom or strategies on my part. This came like grace, like the sun coming through clouds all of a sudden. I was, unbeknownst to me, one of Oprah's personal assistants, a young woman in Chicago, and who I know well now because of all this, and she was taking a yoga class, and a lot of times yoga teachers really are drawn to the Book of Awakening and often quote it to begin yoga sessions. So her teacher was doing that, and she became connected to work and got the Book of Awakening. And then a year later, she gave the book to Oprah as a birthday present.
See, now all you authors listening, do what Mark did, and you too will get on Oprah. Well, there's the formula for getting on Oprah.
Well, what was so amazing and humbling is that, we've all given books to friends or to, it all depends. Also, she could have easily had looked at it and said, oh, that's really nice. Thanks a lot. Sure. But, we have to be in the right moment of opening where what we're given and what we're looking for connect. And it just happened, again, through nothing that any of us did. It was exactly what she was looking for at that time. So the next thing I know, she was saying to somebody, who is this guy? And I want to talk to him. And so, I got a call and, wondered which of my friends is playing a joke on me.
That's great. Mark, in addition to your books, you also do workshops. Tell us what you do in the workshops and how you work with people and what the themes might be and what the format is.
Well, I often take, because I feel that the life of teaching and the life of my writing have started to wonderfully blur over the years. And they're very much, in a way, the same. They both involve deep listening. And, I often take the themes from my books and create usually over 2 or 3 days, workshops or retreats where what my job is, I feel, as a teacher, is to help introduce, as I mentioned, people to their own gifts and their own wisdom, and that I don't have any answers. That all I can do is to open up a heart space, which I do through stories or metaphors. And then we enter that heart space together and we compare notes on what it is to be alive. And so through the course of 3 days, I will have maybe 6 or 7 sessions, which each will start around a theme, like the wisdom of a broken heart, or reliable truths, or saying yes to life, um, or navigating trouble. And I'll take each of those, and we'll often start by sharing a poem, a story, or a metaphor. And then out of that, we'll have a discussion, and then I will have shaped questions, which I love. In fact, in the new book, there are 100 journal questions in the back of it, which I've gathered through years of teaching and offer to the reader. But I'll devise questions on these themes that will invite people to first, then we go through a concentric circle of inquiry, where first they will reflect or meditate on it, then they will journal on it, and then they'll talk in pairs where they only listen to each other. They can't cross talk. And then we come back and see what we've discovered, if anything, as a larger group. And so we go through this sequence through the whole time together, with frequent times of just checking in into the whole group and saying, where are you? What's going on? What's up? What's confusing? What's surprising? What's irritating? And so, the best thing that happens in that space, and when I know, is when I can do a good job, which involves starting more things than we can finish, so that whatever we explore spills out of whatever space we're in into the rest of people's lives. Because when we gather like that, and that's in a long lineage of gathering like that, people have done it forever, that gathering is a resource and not a refuge. It's not a place to hide from life. It's a place to get resources to better live life. And so the best thing that happens in those spaces is when who's the teacher moves around the room, and you can feel it.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't get any better than that. One of the things I like to start with is a wonderful practice in the Native American tradition of elder councils. We still use them today. And elder councils traditionally meet in circle, not for equity, but so that everyone has a direct view of the center.
Wow.
I love that.
Mm-hmm.
What's implicit in that is that we need everybody's view to grasp the center, or the whole, or the totality of life. That no one view, we could be on opposite sides of the circle and say, oh, and we see the center, and we just say, oh yeah, we see the same thing. Well, we don't. And we have to take the time to. So the other assumption that I love about that, implicit in that practice, is that we gather meaning, we don't choose it. Yeah, we gather meaning. We need everybody. The whole is greater than the sum of the parts. And so the older I get, I'm not interested in debate, argument, persuasion. I'm interested in adding and gathering meaning. And, not either or.
Mark, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to come on with us today. Phil, did you have any final points or questions? And I want to mention to our listeners things that join the sea and the sky.
Yes, that's what I wanted to ask Mark about. Tell us about your new book, as briefly as you can, because we're running out of time. And why is it different from all your other books?
Well, it's different and it's not, in the sense that, it's the same central voice that comes through my inquiry, but it's different in the shape of what I've found. So this book comes out of all my years. I've always kept a journal, and this comes out of journaling. So it's one of my most intimate books. And what I've done is taken, over the last 15 years, I've surfaced the most profound and troubling and questions and little stories and observations that have come up, and I've worked with those to create 147, I think it is, entries that and have shaped them to really, and gathered them in passages that we all go through in the 17 sections in the book. And then in the back, I have an essay about the art of journaling with some guidelines and the 100 journal questions to invite people into. And the difference between journaling and a diary is very important. A diary is just kind of an account of circumstance, but a journal is the space in which we have our conversation with the universe. And that's very different. So that's a space where we get to tell the truth, regardless of who's listening, whether we're wrong or right or or whatever. And that, underneath that is that I believe that the journey of the life of expression is healing, regardless of the artifact of expressing.
Very good.
Wow. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome.
We'll look forward to seeing the book. What's the publication date?
Well, it's out. It should be the publication date's November 1st, but I just got word that there's actual books in the Sounds True warehouse. So, and it's available like pre-order on Amazon. So it's going to be here soon.
Okay, good. So we're by the time this goes up, people will be able to pre-order it, and people tuning in after November of 2017 will no doubt be able to get it easily enough at all the usual places. Thank you, Mark.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you both.
Great show.